Because of chaos theory, we can only go out like 6 or 7 days for something like weather. Just because if we keep going further and further down the decimal places, a small difference in our calculation will result in a significant change down the road. It's mostly just electrical signals. Think about electrical signals as like zeros and ones. It's already code. If we were to sever distinct parts in the brain, people's personalities will change. Let's say that we create computer systems that are so sophisticated that they are able to experience love and emotion the same way we are. Then these computer systems, we should probably start thinking about it differently and not thinking about them as computers or more so as conscious beings. I didn't feel like I was winning. I actually wasn't very happy. I would go as far as to say that at that moment, I had depression. Despite me being in what many others would call a winning position, I felt like I was losing. So I had to really take a step back and reevaluate, what is it that I'm getting wrong?
It leads to a sort of nihilism where people assume that there is no meaning to life.
Why do some people discover determinism and become nihilistic? And why do others discover determinism and think that it's a great thing?
Don't you think it's a necessity for civilization to exist with religion?
No, I definitely don't.
For example, you have this very complex system that has the ability to map out every particle. Could we predict the future with such understanding?
So you have a certain number of resources. And some people will spend all their resources. Those are the guys that aren't great at saving. Those are the like impulse buyers. And you'll have people who are good at gathering resources. People who have more money are able to earn more and save more. That 5% end up growing to the point where it's larger than other people's incomes. So they can just have wealth.
We are rolling. A pleasure doing this. I think I'll start from the part I find most interesting about you. You've spent a lot of time studying and understanding how life works as a system. Where did you get this kind of understanding and observation? Like, where did it come from?
It definitely didn't come from any single particular source. I spend a lot of time learning about a lot of things. Like I've studied all the sciences, economics, religion, politics, and whatnot. And it's not like I was doing it to find an understanding of life. I was just doing it because I was interested in these matters, because they have such a huge and profound impact on our lives. And in piecing together everything I learned, I started to recognize that there were patterns that, to me, felt very systematic and video gamey in a way, because I'm a huge gamer myself. And a lot of the people I look up to like to think about life as a game, and they say you have to play the game. A lot of the entrepreneurs say this. For example, Ray Dalio often talks about picking a game and learning how to play it. But he talks about it in the sense of business. And I wanted to better understand life, so I started applying that game framework to life, and I started seeing the patterns, and that's where I land now, where you don't have to think about life as a game. Like, we could be in a video game. Some people suggest that we're in a simulation. But if you start to analyze life like it is a game, and you realize that there are certain things you can do to achieve certain objectives, much like a video game.
Interesting. So at what point in your life were you convinced that after figuring out that life is actually a game, you could apply that knowledge to it? So
this happened to me, I want to say, towards the end of last year. At the time, I was working in a corporate job. Many people would have considered it to be a good gig. Like, I was working remotely, making over $100,000 a year, and it gave me the opportunity to do things like travel. But despite my position in life, I didn't feel like I was winning. I actually wasn't very happy. I would go as far as to say that at that moment, I had depression. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't hate my job. I actually thought it was a pretty decent job. But despite me being in what many others would call a winning position, I felt like I was losing. So I had to really take a step back and reevaluate, what is it that I'm getting wrong? All these people that tell me to play the game, and I felt like I was playing the game at a decent level. What was I doing wrong to make it feel like I was losing? And that's when I realized that human biology doesn't care about your job. It's like, so many people walk through the path where they get rich and they realize that it wasn't about money. I kind of came to that same conclusion. Unfortunately, I'm not rich, but I came to the same endpoint, which is that it isn't about the money. Unfortunately, maybe unfortunately, the way evolution has guided humanity, there's other ways to be happy that doesn't involve, being wealthy. So I decided to take that. I completely quit my job and now I'm just doing YouTube. I'm making like no money off it, but I've luckily put myself in the position where I'm able to do this for several years running out.
I don't think there is or any regret that comes with trying to pursue something you're interested in. I think that's also part of what convinced me to pursue this. And it was all like the idea that if you lose, then at least you tried. You might never know what it means.
And for me also, like, what does losing actually mean? Like, my parents were immigrants over to North America. They didn't know how to speak English when they got here. And, we grew up very poor. I know what it's like to be poor. So is losing being poor? Because I can go back to eating rice every day or whatnot. Like for me, like when I was growing up, McDonald's was my luxury meal that my parents would bring home every once in a while to give us all a treat. So at the time I didn't realize that it was just regular food, but it was like it was like a buffet for me.
I understand. So like at what point? Let's, I think, turn back a bit. Like, what's one experience you had, maybe around that time or generally in your upbringing, that was challenging, but you're sure was necessary for who you are right now?
Oh, man. I want to say the biggest one was after high school. I had lost all my friends. It was something that I did, young, immature and whatnot. And at that time, I was just kind of like, what am I doing in my life? I did not do well in school. I had no friends and I was like overweight and, I had never dated anybody properly. And I was just kind of like, I'm a loser. I'm 17, 18 years old and I'm just the biggest loser. So definitely a very low point in my life. And I think I needed it because when I was in that low point, I decided that I just was going to try to not be a loser anymore. So I started really changing myself, the usual hit the gym, delete Facebook, all that stuff. I just kind of tried to turn my life around. And I want to say that was the start of, maybe not the start, but that was definitely a huge influential moment in allowing me to become who I am now.
Yeah, I think there is always that point in which we realize we can do more with life. Personally, I don't know, maybe when I get to where I'm heading to in life, I'll look back at some point, but currently this is one of the most significant stages of my life with the things I'm choosing to pursue, the things I'm choosing to carry on with. Because most of the things I've also been doing, I've been studying for a very long while. Starting out on this has taken me, I can say, close to 4 years, as from the point when I first had the thought and the idea that I could actually do this for absolutely no reason, but to just be satisfied with myself that I did it. Yeah. Now, about this idea of life being a system, I don't know if you've come across this concept that we might be in a simulation, like some higher intelligence built this very complex simulation. And when you say you're a gamer, I think you can relate to this very well. What does that do to things like love, connection? Do those things lose meaning if they're like code that some higher being wrote?
I don't think so. One of the reasons why is if we look at how the human body actually behaves, all of it is based on what we know so far. It's mostly just electrical signals. So if you can think about electrical signals as like zeros and ones, it's already code. For example, if we know that if we were to sever distinct parts in the brain, people's personalities will change. So let's take that and extrapolate it even further. Let's say that we create computer systems that are so sophisticated that they're able to experience love and emotions the same way we are. Then these computer systems, we should probably start thinking about it differently and not thinking about them as computers or more so as conscious beings. Now, I don't think we're there yet, but the point that I'm trying to say is if we're in a simulation, it doesn't really matter if it's fake, or maybe simulated rather than fake, as long as we treat it as real. It's based on how we feel about it and not how, like, because who gets to say that it's fake?
Actually, I have a similar thought when it comes to this argument about free will. So if it exists, what does it change about the whole experience of being human? If it doesn't exist, still, what does it change about the whole experience? But I have something I've heard from Neil deGrasse Tyson when he talks about the idea of the simulation. And he says that there are two possibilities, which are, we are either that prime civilization that is going to create the simulation, or we are that fresh one that has just been created. Since we do not have ourselves the ability to create a simulation and system as complex as what we are working with right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I don't agree with it whatsoever. There's no reason why we can't be in the middle. And let's say there's like one prime civilization. There's no reason why we can't be like civilization 7 out of 100. For example, imagine GTA, like Grand Theft Auto 9 is so good that every NPC in Grand Theft Auto 9 thinks that it's living a real life, and it thinks that it's a real person. There's going to be hundreds of millions of Grand Theft Auto 9 printed, not just one. So there could be, hundreds of millions of this game that we're playing that's printed, and the player could just be playing as one character, whatever it is. But the idea that Neil deGrasse Tyson posits, I don't think there's much just strong logic behind it.
So it could be multiple prints, but then only one is able to figure out how to create a simulation of its own. Is that right?
Yeah, it may not even be possible, right? Like, there's this movie, I think it's called The 13th Floor, where it's exactly spoilers for anybody that hasn't watched the movie, but the main character is essentially a character in a video game, and in his game, he managed to create his own simulation. So there's like layers of simulations, but there is no guarantee that we'll be able to create additional simulations in our world that are equal to ours. We think that there might be, but it's like, let's say I were to create a sim, like Sims 4, in Sims 5, we give them the ability to do their own research. Could they end up creating their own simulation within Sims 5? It's possible. Could that simulation become sophisticated enough to generate consciousness? I think there's like a resource thing. But we don't know. That's just all speculation from here on out. And for me, like, the simulation argument or simulation discussion is not very important.
Mm-hmm.
It's like fun to think about, but like, it shouldn't change your life if we're in a simulation or not. If anything, it's made me more certain in what it is I want to do. So because life follows rules, you know that if you do something, you can reliably get an output from it. We know that, for example, if I were to exercise more, I get stronger. And it's the same thing with many other aspects in life. So, for example, we know that if you're trying to get better at podcasting, if you podcast more, you'll get better at it. And it's not like random things happen. The only, let's say, random thing that really happens in your life is your starting role. It's like, where were you born? What are your genetics? But everything after that is based entirely on what inputs that are put into your system after you're born.
So philosophers have also this thought that if we say that life is a simulation, or if for example, every particle that maybe makes up the human body is mapped, or that makes up the universe is mapped, that you could almost certainly predict the future, what the future can be. If you can map out, if for example, you have this very complex computer system that has the ability to map out every particle and where it is, does that like change what our future could be? Could we predict the future with such understanding?
Yeah, that's Laplace's demon. And if we if we're able to get the processing power to do it, then based on our current understanding of physics and, let's say, free will and determinism, we should be able to predict everything. Now, that's a big if. How are we ever going to get that level of energy or the sophisticated technology to calculate everything? Like for now, we already have a very hard time calculating the movement of water properly. So we want to throw in every single particle in the universe and try to calculate that. That seems very that seems
Unlikely.
like it's outside the realm of possibility. Just because you have to like maybe I'm being a bit closed-minded here, but calculations require energy, and how are we going to get enough energy to calculate everything in the universe, right?
I think it's more of a philosophical thought experiment. If we could, because every understanding has a way it transitions towards the future. Maybe that could be a feature that we could maybe harness and do predictions.
Yeah, I think the ability to do predictions was something we already are able to do, but we're only able to do it with the data information that we have. So we can't predict everything because we don't have perfect information. And are you familiar with chaos theory?
Yeah.
Yeah, so because of chaos theory, we can only go out like, let's say 6 or 7 days for something like weather, just because if we keep going further and further down the decimal places, a small change, a small difference in our calculation will result in a significant change down the road. So the amount of processing power that we would need to accurately predict something many days out, especially if we're considering everything in the world, it's just unlikely. So we should be able to take the information that we do have and predict whatever we can within the realms that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say here is like trying to predict yourself 30 years in the future makes no sense, but trying to predict what you can do within 1 or 2 years, that's a bit more reasonable.
So basically you're talking about how this understanding can be applied in the day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, the more you learn, the more you start understanding how the board works. So, for example, you talked a little bit about your goals right now. I imagine podcasting is one of them. Yeah, so we know that if you keep at podcasting and keep getting better, your viewership will go up. Unless there are thousands of other podcasters that are stealing views from you, as long as you keep getting better and you keep putting out content, your podcast will start becoming more and more popular. But can you use that and predict like 30 years out where your life is going to be? It's going to be difficult, but you could use it to predict, let's say 1, 2, 3 years out and understand that maybe you're getting 500 views now and 3 years down the road, you might be able to get like 10,000.
I've watched you talk about Walter Scheidel, where in his book, The Great Leveler, where he talks about the 4 horsemen that lead to transition of power. And what could you first explain that to someone that is not familiar with Walter Scheidel's work?
Yeah, for sure. Let's go all the way back to the idea of inequality and why it's inevitable. So you have a certain number of resources, and some people will spend all their resources. Those are the guys that aren't great at saving. Those are the like impulse buyers, and you'll have people who are good at gathering resources. And if you're familiar with with like bank accounts, many have interest that you make on your savings. So let's say you have like a 5% interest or 5% compounding on your bank account. People who have more money and are able to earn more and save more, that 5% will end up growing and growing to the point where it's larger than other people's incomes. So they can just have wealth. And because of the way compounding works, they're just going to continue to absorb more and more wealth from the overall pie, leading to more and more inequality. So throughout history, there's only been 4 different ways that wealth has been spread back out into the general population. And they all involve, unfortunately, a great loss of life. The first one is like it was a pandemic. So the Black Death, for example, that killed over 50% of Europe. After that, a bunch of people ended up getting more power as laborers. So the poor in Europe ended up evolving, and they were no longer serfs effectively. The second way is through war. So we see this after World War II. That's where the modern middle class really erupted. And that's because war destroyed so much capital and destroyed a bunch of labor. The value of labor went up and there was more work to do. The third and fourth involve pretty much governments collapsing. And during these collapses, like the fall of the Roman Empire, for example, the rich no longer had the systems in place to protect their wealth. And in places like communist Russia and communist China, when the new government came in, they took everything away from the rich and redistributed it to the poor. Now, those are the only ways wealth inequality has ever leveled, but they're not necessarily good ways in which they leveled, because most of them required either lots of death or lots of destruction of capital. For example, if you take someone that's rich and you destroy all their wealth, they're no longer extremely wealthy, but nobody got richer.
Now, my question about that is, for example, in a world where a reset requires that extreme amount of destruction and death, how does someone again apply systems and navigate their way through such a world that seems not to care?
Well, the first thing you have to decide is whether or not wealth is important to you. Because you don't need to become filthy rich in order to enjoy life. You need the basics and you need some kind of security. So in a world where there are a bunch of people that are super rich, if you are not super rich, can you still live a fulfilled and meaningful life? And I want to say that the answer for most people is probably yes. Some people will want to change their socioeconomic status, in which case you have to learn how to play the game to get that level of wealth.
If someone, for example, has grown up in a part of the world where they have seen this chaos and how much very many things are unpredictable, that at one point everything is fine, then everything can change all of a sudden by war or by drought or by just a natural disaster. So how does someone really reconcile those two? That's the point I was trying to get to.
You may not have a lot of power to influence things. How do you use the systems in place to try to change it? Yeah, that's a bit more tough, because because there's only so much a single person can do, especially when we take into consideration things like power. So in let's say a less fortunate country where there's a group of people that have all the power and you want to change things within that country, you have to find a way to amass power, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't threaten them. Otherwise, they're going to try to take you out. Now, I've never led any revolutions or anything like that, but that's how we see things typically happen in the past. For example, in China, Mao amassed power by going into the rural villages and getting them all on their side. Once he had enough power, he ended up being able to topple the government. The same thing happened in Vietnam. I'm more familiar with that story, which is after World War II, when the US dropped the nuclear bombs on Japan. Japan ended up fleeing from their stations in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, what he ended up doing is he came in and he said, it was me. I was the one that got the Japanese to run away. So using fake information, he managed to get the support of all the Northern Vietnamese. And through that, he managed to amass power and do change within Vietnam. Now, that's not something that everybody will want to or necessarily can do. But if you are in a situation where you do want change, the reality is power is a huge part of that calculation.
So is manipulation also a way of applying to systems?
Yes, manipulation is definitely a way to get people on your side and get people through power, get more power. You just have to be careful with it, because nobody likes being manipulated. So I'd say it's more so to get them on your side through, through convincing arguments, through ways that could actually improve their life. But you have to where's the line between being convincing and being manipulative,
There is this, I think it leads to a sort of nihilism where people assume that there is no meaning to life. And so they straight up just lose the morale of even putting in energy into pursuing certain things that could be useful to them. So for someone that is maybe facing towards that direction of losing an interest in meaning for life, what do you have to say about that?
It's all a mindset thing. When you really look into it, why do some people discover determinism and they become nihilistic? And why do others discover determinism and think it's a great thing? Right? And I think that has to do with your experiences and everything going up to whatever situation that you put yourself in now. So if you are in a situation where you feel like it doesn't matter because there's no meaning to life, you have to either find a meaning, or you have to trick yourself into understanding that there are things you can do in life that will bring you enjoyment. Because if you believe that there's nothing you can do that will help you out and bring you enjoyment, then that's kind of the life that you will live. It's like those studies where they find that people who think that they're lucky end up interpreting the same situation differently. So, for example, if you think you're an unlucky person, I think I'm a lucky person, we can go through the exact same day. And for me, I will walk away with it with a much more positive experience on how the day went, simply because of mindset. So it's hard to say, like, if you're nihilistic, change your mindset. It's really hard to say, really hard to do, but I know that you can do it because I used to be nihilistic like that. I used to think, hey, like, what's the point of living? What's the point of all of this? And the conclusion I came to is you just got to enjoy the ride. You know, you're on Earth for a certain amount of time. And if you decide that you don't want to play anymore, you can self-select yourself out of the game. But there's nothing after this. So while you're here, might as well make the most out of it.
For like the unpredictable things that happen, the easiest interpretation and answer to them has always been a creator, like a being up there that is watching and controlling the cards from behind the scenes. What do you think about this idea?
I think that it's a great story that people tell themselves, but I don't think it's real. Religion is a great thing, right? Religion has caused a lot of people to find meaning in life. Without religion, humans wouldn't have been able to organize and get to where we are today. But if you're going to outsource agency like that and say that the reason why things are happening is because of something outside of my control, then you're never going to try to take control of your own life.
That is interesting because I've listened to Jordan Peterson make mention of something that it's almost certainly impossible for one individual to find meaning in their one lifetime that they have. And it's easier to associate with a system that has already created a form of meaning for you to live by. For example, which religion perfectly delivers and has delivered for a good time. You come and everything is already defined. You have what love means, what hate means, what's good, what's not good. Don't you think it's really a necessity for civilization to exist with religion?
No, I definitely don't. I think that we can come up with moral values and our own interpretations of what's good and evil without religion. Religion tells you what's good and evil, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to believe it or to think it's true. Like, for example, many religions have commands to kill people for certain reasons. Is that good or evil? According to religion, is good because the other people are evil. But I don't believe that. I don't think that the other people are evil, and I don't want to follow what a book says that claims that the other people are evil. So I think religion was a great baseline, a great starting place. Like, if you go from being cavemen, like imagine being monkeys, to going to religion, like that's a huge step up. But I think that we need to step up from religion and come up with systems that are able to bring prosperity to more.
Me personally, I think it's going to take a good while for us to move on from that completely. With what is currently going on in the world, I think it's still a necessity for humanity because we are not really reconciled just with the divisions that currently exist, just around ideas that are not even related to religion. You find that the easiest way to reconcile people is through that path.
It's hard to say. In my opinion, I think that ideally we create a new religion. Like, I thought about this a lot, where how do we reconcile the differences between the different groups of people?
That's the thought I also had when you mentioned that we can create new meaning. Doesn't that also translate to creating new religion? Because I think that's how Scientology was given birth to. They thought they could oppose with something that was absolutely contrary, but now, today, it's a religion.
Yeah, see, the thing about any kind of, let's call it, institution, is that it's prone to being corrupt or getting corrupt. So, when Christianity was a thing, when Christianity was booming, it was very corrupt. It was extremely corrupt, but that wasn't the intention of Christianity. And it's the same with any kind of institution. If we create a new religion that tries to help people out, eventually some level of corruption will get into it. But that's besides the point, though. The point I'm trying to make is that we have so many different groups of religions, so many different sects that are counter to each other right now. And what is the solution? I don't think no religion is the solution. I think that some people, like, religion really helps a lot of people, and religion can definitely, like, it's a great source of community and whatnot. So are we able to create a new religion that throws away a lot of the stuff that we don't like about the past and incorporate some of the new things that are more modern?
Actually, one of the science fiction ideas that I'm really hurt doesn't actually exist in life is this thing in the foundation books. There's also a TV show that, like, the math they were doing to predict the future of civilization. I don't know if you're familiar with the Foundation TV show. And I think that science is very good so that we can know where we're heading. It sort of answers some of those questions. Because at one point, Sheldon figures that for his foundation to survive, it has to transition into a religion, because it's the only way you can find people and get them to build loyalty to a system or an idea. Do you think for people to completely move away from the traditional understanding of religion, we need to create just something bigger than it or better?
I think that in order for us to convince people to move on to something that is better, we have to convince them that it's better. And unfortunately, we can't convince people using reasoning because it doesn't work. We know time and time again that if you just try to reason with people, they don't want to listen to it. You have to appeal to their emotions. So I haven't read the book that you're talking about, but I can see why that character would come to the conclusion that he needs to create a religion, because religion is really good at appealing to people's emotions. And that's one of the reasons why it's become so successful and has still lasted 2,000 years later.
Every good theory, of course, has to be tested on all sides. What's one thing that you think challenges yours and really proves that it's lacking at some point?
The big one, I'd say, is probably people's experiences with spirituality and acts of God. So many people have claimed to have had personal experiences with Jesus, with God, and whatnot. I haven't had one myself, but it seems to be a recurring pattern, and I can't dismiss it and say that they're all fake and it's all in their head. That's generally my stance. But the fact that it just keeps happening, and there might be something there that makes it so that my theory is obviously not 100% foolproof. So things involving spirituality, like, one of the reasons why I think life is a game is because the physics engine is reliable. We can see it, we can test it, but there are things that exist that we believe exist out of it. So when somebody takes like an acid trip or whatever, is what they are experiencing still a part of physics? We're not 100% certain yet.
Every system that really stands should be able to withstand like all the forces that come and approach it. There's a lot that is going on that can't be explained, and I think dismissing it is, I call it intellectual laziness. Some of these things need more attention. Not so long ago, I was looking into this idea of UFOs. Actually did a video about it, and it's amazing how much there is, but people just dismiss because maybe it's a lot of effort that would be needed to understand what's going on, or just doesn't really appeal to their own comfort. And I think more things, at least certain things, need to be given more attention, and religion and the experiences that it offers should be given some more attention.
Yeah, I definitely think so. But the issue is we can't test it. When somebody claims to have had an experience with God, or when somebody claims to have, had an encounter with the UFO, we can't collectively come by, take a look at what happened, and be like, hey, I think this is real. I think this happened. We have tried very hard to test it, and we have tried very hard to replicate, these sorts of encounters and experiences. But because we're unable to do so, it's hard to say that we should spend more resources on it.
Before we got here, I'd ask you to nominate a question that I would maybe be asking everyone in the subsequent season or episodes. Do you have that with you?
Nominate a question. the question I would like to ask the future attendants of your podcast is, do you think we're in a simulation?
Okay, that's a nice one. Okay, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure doing this.
No, thank you, Ezra. Pleasure's all mine.
Last time we talked, you had nothing to say.